Hi everyone. Today we're going to go from the end of World War I, including the Great Depression, up into the rise of fascist dictators and kind of how governments have changed in Europe since the beginning of World War I and hopefully lead us into World War II as well. So, Great Depression, there are a couple, really two big factors that lead us there. Number one is inflation, especially obviously in Germany. And the reason for this really comes down to the Treaty of Versailles and the Paris Peace Conference. Germany is forced to accept the war guilt clause, basically saying, hey, forget about Serbia and Austria-Hungary and nationalism and Franz Ferdinand. It's totally Germany's fault for all of this. And as a part of this, at this peace conference, England, David Lloyd George, the Prime Minister of England, actually runs on the platform of making Germany pay for the war. And so Germany is given these huge war reparations. And there are a lot of things that go into this. France tries to assume control over the Ruhr Valley because Germany can't pay, and so Germany prints more money, and Germany ends up with hyperinflation, as we'll see here in a little bit. The second thing is the stock market crashed in the U.S. in 1929. United States was booming, the Roaring Twenties were happening, and speculators were running wild on Wall Street. These investors would also be investing money in Europe. The U.S. is basically the only economy left standing after World War I. So all of the money that is going to be used to rebuild Europe is coming from these U.S. investors. Well, when the stock market hits, there's a run on the banks in the U.S., but also those investors are going to be pulling their money out of the European investment projects as well. And so as a result of these two things, Europe and the world really goes into this global depression. As that's happening, Marxism is becoming more and more palatable for people. These workers don't have jobs, and it's an easy thing to look at and say, okay, this revolution needs to occur. The workers are being downtrodden, but yet these business owners are still making money off of us, and I can't afford bread, and blah, blah, blah. The traditional way to get out of a depression is to reduce budget. That means lower wages, and then introduce some protective tariffs on goods coming in from other countries, so that you try and keep money in your economy. So it becomes very protectivist and very protectionist. John Maynard Keynes publishes in 1936 a different approach to this, offering that the government should spend its way out of a depression, create public works projects that the government pays for. People will then have money in their pockets to put back into American businesses. The government can make money off of those taxes and try to balance its budget that way. So a little bit different take on things. That's the way the U.S. ends up going. Franklin Delano Roosevelt's second New Deal works projects like the WPA, the TVA, the Tennessee Valley Authority, and different things like that. We also see in France kind of a movement towards a more socialist perspective on things. And so we have this group known as the Popular Front. They're one you're probably going to want to know for the AP exam. In response to all of these socialist ideas and more liberalist ideas coming about, we see a rise in fascism. It's an easy sell to say to business owners, look at all of these different things. People are getting more and more involved in communism. The workers are going to overthrow the bourgeoisie, et cetera, et cetera. So what do you need? Well, you need somebody really, really strong to stand up to that and to hammer them down and make sure that they don't get any control. So all of that is going on during the Great Depression, or at least as a result of it. Germany, we just have some ideas here in terms of hyperinflation, what it is, what a loaf of bread costs in Germany during this time. The exchange rate, the value of the German mark compared to the US dollar, this comes from your textbook, 4.2 to 1 in 1914, the end of November 1923, due to that hyperinflation, 4.2 trillion to 1. And then the graphic there just helping you to realize what the difference is between million, billion, and trillion and what that looks like. I like this graphic. It gets us from the idea that these central democracies, these centrist democracies, or at least based on Republican democratic values, how swinging to the left is going to be the idea of communism and swinging to the right is going to be fascism. Those ideas, they don't just pop up out of nowhere. For the most part, these extremist views are taking a look at, are based on economics and the economic feelings of the time. This is just a nice little graphic to discern between fascism and communism, and they're actually more similar than I think people tend to lend those ideas to. So if you get a chance, please go through that. Take a look at how they assume power, take a look at how they use power. This just gives us an idea of Europe before and after World War I. The big differences are going to be Germany. They're also going to be Austria-Hungary and into the Balkan area there. We see Pan-Slavism take on a new role with Yugoslavia. And so we're left with these governments after World War I. these democratic governments. Remember, that doesn't mean that they're necessarily true democracies, but they're based on democratic principles. Most of these in Europe, especially, are going to be parliamentary republics of some kind. England is still going to have a monarchy, but with parliament kind of being the ones running the show. Then, as you look to the fascist states, it's going to be Italy, Germany after the Weimar Republic is destroyed, and in the USSR, we have a communist state. Socialist, communist, it depends on how you really want to talk about it or look at those terms. But for our purposes, we need to know that they're different, but I wouldn't necessarily freak out if you use them both. In the middle of this flag of Italy here, we have what is called a fasces, and that makes an appearance in the next slide, taking a look at something from AP Art History. This is George Washington. This is displayed in the Capitol building in Virginia. You can see he's leaning on this fasces, and it's a bundle of rods or sticks, denotes authority, denotes leadership, singular leadership, and it seems a little odd because George Washington in this picture is kind of dichotomous with this symbol of complete authority. He's wearing common military clothing. He's got a plow behind him, signifying him going back to farming after his time as leader was done, as opposed to assuming full leadership like someone like Julius Caesar would have. But Italy is absolutely going to turn into a fascist state. Commonalities in fascism, post-World War I anyway, lingering bitterness from the end, especially the Treaty of Versailles in Germany, that's absolutely going to play a big time role. Economic difficulties, we mentioned the Great Depression, government weaknesses. A lot of these new republics, your textbook is going to argue, don't have a traditional democratic or republican ideals to fall back on. They're not necessarily hugely influenced by the Enlightenment. Those liberal ideas don't really come into play, and part of it is because most of these have absolute monarchies for long periods of time, large periods. And so to immediately switch over to a republic is difficult in the best of conditions. But then you're dealing with the Great Depression on top of it. And so it's easier for people to say, well, this isn't working. Let's go back to something that has worked. And so one person with total control is going to be kind of what people are going to look towards. The weaknesses of these governments is kind of profound, and we'll get there with Germany. Political disunity, we don't really see we don't really see a couple of larger political parties emerge in a lot of these places. It tends to be a lot of different pockets of different types of political parties. And so if you're able to gain control over one of them and then start to link some of those political groups together, you can amass power that way, much greater than everybody else has. These fascists are also going to tie leadership to the military, appeal to the sense of militarism that has been around prior to World War I, and also especially the sense of nationalism. You're either for us or against us tends to be a mode that's used by a lot of these fascists. The symbols that are created and used, already talked about kind of the flag. You'll see a lot of these fascist dictators in military uniforms trying to create that link. Hitler is especially known for his use of symbolism. Think about the Nazi swastika being based on East Asian philosophies and of peace and harmony. The symbol of the eagle is something he blatantly rips off from ancient Rome. The great admirer of ancient Rome, and a lot of these symbols for him tend to go hand in hand. And finally, I kind of alluded to this, but loyalty to the state above all else. Loyalty to the party and the state above anything else. To be willing to shed blood for those. That's a common idea of fascism. This is like the guidebook to post-World War I fascism. Fascism in Italy, we're talking about Benito Mussolini specifically. You can see here he is looking very stern in the middle. And again, he's in military garb. He's got these military symbols on there. That's going to be a big part. That's a big part of who he is and what he does, trying to create that link. He initially starts as a socialist nationalist, but then not so much socialist when he realizes it's easier to amass power catering to the conservative business people of Italy. Italy is one of those states that had been monarchies and had been broken up. It's really only been around and united since the 1870s. And so for Italy, it's that much easier to say, okay, you know what, this isn't working, so I will give over some control to a singular leader. He's going to use violence politically to eliminate any political opposition. His group is known as the Black Shirts because, shocker, they wore black shirts. This group is going to be physically breaking up parties and rallies and hitting political dissidents and things like that. He's going to try and get into censorship a little bit, censorship of the press, not quite to the same degree that Adolf Hitler is going to get into in Germany. Political consolidation, as I mentioned earlier, taking some of those political groups, molding them into a larger political group with him at the forefront. Shout out to Frau Potain. Um, the education system is going to focus on the ideals that he wants as part of his doctrines. And that's really a key no matter what dictatorship you're talking about. The whole idea is you want to educate the kids. If you can get the kids on your side, if you can indoctrinate them young, you have an entire generation at your disposal as they become of age. For women, wants them to occupy traditional roles within the household, which kind of flies in the face a little bit of the way that Europe is going at this point. Contributing the workplace, things like that, aren't traditionally Italian values, and so Mussolini is trying to harken back to previous time periods. And finally, he has to work with religion. Italy, obviously, the power base of the Catholic Church, and so that plays a big role for him. Weimar Republic in Germany. This is the intermediate time period between World War I and until Adolf Hitler takes total control. Germany, as I said, it's an absolute monarchy for a long period of time. It's only been unified since 1871. And so getting it to become a republic is not super popular. In addition, looked at that the Weimar Republic and signing the armistice and signing the peace treaty stabbed their own soldiers in the back. And so this isn't a really popular government even before we start to get into seeing where that opposition is coming from. It is a centrist government. It's a moderate government, and so it's fielding attacks from the left in terms of communism and socialism, and it's fielding attacks on the right from more conservative, kind of dictatorial groups, conservative groups. And so it's not, even if it's a really strong government, it's going to be difficult to kind of fight politically on two fronts, but it's not a strong political entity. And so it really, really struggles. And that's where Adolf Hitler comes in. He's an Austrian, son of a customs agent, grows up in this upper middle class, failed artist, as we'll see. And as he goes to Austria, is kind of his journey to find himself, not being accepted by the school, the Art Academy of Vienna. He gets really into Wagner, and the ideas of nationalism really start to play a role in his life. In terms of his artwork, he's behind the times. He's not a bad artist, but the artwork that he is creating is meant to be here's exactly what's happening at this moment. And he's doing this in the early 1900s when we've already moved into Impressionism, where it's getting away from that, trying to create exactly what is accurate. And so he's like 20 or 30 years behind the times here. And so you get a sense of why he is deemed to be a failed artist. But you also get a sense that he holds on to what is concrete. And so everything is black or white with him. And so if he's failed, that's it. That's all there is to it. He's failed. He's not going to change his style. Political rise. Adolf Hitler in World War I serves as a messenger. By all accounts, serves heroically, bravely, taking messages in between the trench lines and things like that. Experiences kind of leading men for the first time, and so he jumps into politics and makes his way to Munich and becomes eventually the leader of the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the NSDAP, which is going to be the Nazi party as we look at N and S, taking kind of the phonetic of those, Nazi. He creates his own version of Mussolini's black shirts, the SA, the stormtroops. I'm not even going to attempt the German form of that. Almost in a Star Wars-like space. These guys are going to blindly follow their leader, for the most part. They're going to break up political rallies. They're going to break up political opponents, enabling Adolf Hitler to gain quite a bit of political support, especially within southern Germany in Bavaria and Munich. In November of 1923, because the Weimar Republic government is so weak, he initiates the Beer Hall Putsch, this attempt of violent overthrow in Berlin, lands him in jail. He's only sentenced to 5 years for trying to overthrow the government, which seems a little shocking. But the judges tended to be conservative, and therefore they were more willing to listen to his appeals. This is going to give him immense notoriety, and it's during his time in jail where he dictates his story, my loosely based autobiography, I guess you could say, My Struggle, Mein Kampf, kind of outlining who he is, his beliefs, including what is known as Lebensraum, the living space of Germany, the idea that Germany can't be constrained by these other countries around it and needs to grow, and that's going to be justification for occupying different places, this Lebensraum. That's all I have for right now. If you have any questions, please let me know, and have a great day.